My name is Peter. My family name is Schuttevaar, but I would not ask a native English speaking person to pronounce that, so just call me Peter. Thank you for tuning into my channel called the BPO Theory. BPO is an abbreviation of Basic Phenomenal Objects, and that in turn is a mouthful of words for a new theory of physics. You never heard of BPO before? Well, it's no problem. I'm going to tell you all about it in a series of videos. I am a teacher of physics, IT and business science, and I'm also a consultant in matters of human cooperation. So I'm rather a busy person, and I only have limited time and resources available for the production of YouTube videos. In fact, I'm not much of a YouTuber at all. You can see this for yourself, as I do not have the most modern equipment. Although, of course, I do have a fully digital chalk and green screen board here. So then why did I open a YouTube channel? Well, I have written a book on physics titled Monkeys Do Not Die as Lizards, containing a new vision on physics. And many people who read the book or tried to read it started out expecting just another theory. And so they used their old schemes of interpreting it. But that is not how you read my book, since it contains a rather radical way of looking at the physical reality around us. So I thought that perhaps by showing my real talking face here, I could give it a bit more weight. And in this first part, I would like to focus only on the most basic idea of BPO and skip the rest. Okay, let's go. Yes? Now, a theory of physics tries to reduce reality to some basic parts or basic principles. The table of chemical elements is an example of that. We were able to reduce millions of substances, as we see in our daily lives, like for example water and sand, to just some 100 elementary substances, like for example oxygen and iron. This was a huge reduction. We went from millions to about 100. And it did not stop there. Each elementary substance had a corresponding atom that was made up of just 3 subatomic particles, namely the proton, the neutron and the electron. And it was just another reduction. We went from millions to just 3. Only 2 more to go. But then the trouble started. We found a lot of other subatomic particles that turned our nice trinity into a disorderly landscape of again some 100 subatomic particles. And some of these particles had a charge, like the electron, and others had not. Some had a mass and others had not. It was a mess. So some physicists called it a particle zoo. Although if I were a zoo, I would be a bit offended by this comparison. So now physicists turned towards the table of elements again. They thought that a similar type of reduction as produced by the table of elements could be mimicked. And this has led us to the so-called standard model, with a set of about 32 fundamental particles. Now, what struck me was that nobody seemed to have had the ambition to reduce the particles to just only one fundamental particle, or only one basic particle, as I prefer to call it. To be honest, I do not understand this, really, I don't. Why should we keep up with these 32 basic building blocks? To me, it looks far more logical to only have one basic building block of the universe. And why would nature or the universe invent a whole set of basic particles all at the same time, right from the Big Bang? What kind of coordinating mechanism would have put that whole set in place? And what sort of supreme being would then have sought to fine-tune all these fundamental building blocks so that they started to interact so nicely and minutely? To me, this did not make sense at all. And this sense of unease started my ambition to formulate a theory of physics that has only one type of building basic block. The universe is then composed of a multitude of only these building blocks and no other types. And I call these building blocks basic phenomenal objects, or in short, just abbreviated to BP. So whenever I talk about a BP, I mean these little, most basic building blocks of the universe, of which there is only one type. So then, if there is only one type of building block, how can the whole diversity of the universe, especially here on Earth, emerge from that? Now let me make a small sidestep on emergent phenomena. This channel is not only for professional physicists, but also for interested laymen, so I think some explanation might be helpful. Emergent behavior is what you see in a swarm of birds. You can mimic the behavior of a swarm of birds in a computer. So then you set up some very simple rules for the behavior of one single bird. You define, for example, a minimum and maximum distance to other birds, and you let it react in certain simple ways to a change in direction of a neighboring bird. And there you are. You will see that the sum of that simple behavior of these individual birds is a complex behavior of the swarm, moving up and down in strange, constantly changing formations, and in a seemingly unpredictable rhythm. And this swarm example shows that it is possible to start with very simple rules and arrive at complex group behavior. And we call that complex group behavior an emergent phenomena. Now back to my ambition. I sought to describe a basic building block of nature with just some simple rules of behavior. And then from this simple behavior, all the complexities of physical reality would emerge. As I found these simple rules in the summer of 2018, I had a search of already some 20 years behind me. So as simple as they may seem as an end result, it was a very complex journey to get there. Now there are only three basic attributes to a BP. The most important is that it has an intrinsic speed. So a BP is the most basic thingy in the universe that has as a basic attribute that it already moves about. It does not need some mechanism to put it in motion. Normally, you have a particle in rest and you need a force to get it moving. Well, not so the BP. No. It moves about at a high velocity just as it comes into existence. If it ever came into existence, of course. You could also say that it interacts with space in such a manner that it automatically moves in a specific direction. To be honest with you, I found this idea a bit absurd myself as I first conceived of it. But as the years progressed and I thought more about it, I became more and more convinced that this was the only possibility. If there is to be a singular basic particle in nature, then it must have an intrinsic speed. Otherwise we cannot explain the multitude of dynamic processes in our cosmos. Everything would start to stand still and become frozen. Now a second attribute of a BP is that it has the ability to alter the direction of motion of another BP. So they mutually affect their direction. I call this attribute its mutuality. This mutuality has some resemblance with what we know as a dynamic electrical charge, as it can also be positive as well as negative, but I have to stress that they are not the same. I will explain the differences in just a minute or two. Then as a third, last attribute, a BP can resist a change to its direction of motion. I call this its inertia. It is easier to affect the direction of motion of a BP when it has a smaller inertia. Just as it is easier to set an object in motion if it has less mass. Now to sum this up, we now have a basic particle of which all universe is built. I will demonstrate in short how they interact by explaining the difference between two interacting electrons and two interacting BPs. Now with two electrons you will have a very strong static force in between them, and that force will force them apart. But we are not interested in this static force, so we imagine it just not to exist. So these electrons sit very peacefully next to each other. What we are interested in is another force, namely the electrodynamic force, also called magnetism. And this force only comes in action as these two electrons start to move here in situation A. They move in the same direction. Now, the electrodynamic force, will now cause the electrons to repulse, to move away from each other. And if these two electrons, on the other hand, move in opposite direction, like here in situation B, we will see an attractive dynamic force pulling the two towards each other. And so you see that the electrodynamic force, as we know it, is not consistent when it comes to attraction and repulsion. Two charged particles can either repulse or attract each other, depending on how they move. And such a force cannot produce stable configurations of particles. Try to model it in your computer, it will not work. But now look at situation C and D here, where I replaced the two electrons with two BPs. If I have two BPs with the same mutuality, either positive or negative, like we see here in situation C, they will repulse, no matter how they move with respect to each other. If we, on the other hand, have two BPs of opposite mutuality, like here in situation D, they will always attract. Again, no matter how they move with respect to each other. This is how the basic interaction between two BPs works. And it is a complete new type of dynamical interaction, a new force of nature. And this, dear viewer, makes all the difference. We can now imagine particles of nature, like for example the neutron, as a configuration of two BPs with opposite mutuality, and they will continuously deflect each other paths of motion towards each other, and so create a stable pattern of motion like I've depicted here. What you see here is two BPs circling in opposite motion around a common point in space. And what is so neat about all this is that the electrostatic force and the electrodynamic force, as we know them, both emerge naturally from this basic interaction between BPs, as I just explained. But not only these two forces, there are many other properties that we know of particles from experiment, like for example their size and their gyromagnetic properties, some also call that spin, that emerge naturally from the interaction between BPs. But how all that works I will explain to you in follow-up videos, because we do not want this first video to be overloaded with too many new ideas, or do we? But if you are impatient, as you of course ought to be by now, you can download my book titles Monkeys Do Not Die as Lizards using the link below this video. And if you have questions, please also ask them here beneath. Perhaps I can answer them in a follow-up video. Well, that's it for today. And as you can see, I have made abundant use of my green screen and of my digital chalk. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and to tell your friends all about it. And please give me a thumbs up if you liked it. See you next time.